racing club. Otaki had a racing club. You know, all these ones. Kumara had a racing club. You know, there were 65 odd tracks around the country. They've got to be cut back. They're incorporated societies, so they're like bowling clubs. If you shut down a bowling club, the money goes basically to the Minister of Internal Affairs and can be redistributed. You can't, like, let's the three of us be the last three members at this bowling club and sell off the land, you know. So he's arguing there should be 2 in Auckland, and yet the study and everything they've done is
3 in Auckland.
Well, if you included Pukekohe, but he's saying 2 city tracks. Yeah. And you look at it, you look out there, and it's further complicated. They've got sports fields in the infield and stuff like that. Look, it has passed. It's hard to see.
I don't want to be too mean about the Avondale Race Club, because it's a great part of the community, but Olivia, it really has seen better days.
Well, I think there's an opportunity there again. So if it's seen better days, then why don't we take that land and rewild it, or do something really exciting for the community that's actually needed?
Well, I think his point, though, is if they say they close down, the Minister of Internal Affairs, I think, she then would have the power to decide whatever happens with that money. It's not like, well, we'll take it and you can have this and you can have that. I think the plan was to try and look at reinvesting the money. See, this was the Winston Peters, you know, this is the big thing that, you know, then he was accused of being in the pocket of the racing industry, and they're all grumbling about it. But he is, where the money goes to develop that, so they're saying reduce it. It used to be up to, I think, 30,000 people worked in the racing industry. It's down to about 20,000.
Here's the deal, though. Is the government stripping Heartland New Zealand of its prized turf? Should some things just be kept as they are? I mean, racing is one of the 3 R's. This is who we are. And if you go around the country stripping these iconic, wonderful, in many cases, provincial racing clubs, the community loses something.
Go to a racing club, and even some of the big areas, and there is stuff all people will turn up for a meeting. You know, people can gamble online or go to the TAB and do that sort of stuff. So those days of being the big social occasion, the whole community got out. Now, that may work in Kumara, where they have, a Hokitika Racing Club might have 1 meeting a year, and it's a big occasion. But that means you've still got to sustain the grounds people looking after the assets. That's the problem, I've
Final thought, Lydia?
Yeah, no, I was thinking if they're going to redistribute and actually conglomerate and make that racing park much better, then why not? Because then the animals are actually well looked after as well, and that's a concern. If it's a rundown race course, what's happening to the animals, actually? So, and the horses there. So if they shut them down and bring them down to 1, but it's really well looked after, really well attended, then everyone wins.
This is from our younger listeners. I am 12 and we listened to your argument on bike helmets, and it is probably the dumbest argument I've ever heard. Bike accidents are far more serious than what you could do walking. If bike helmets are made optional, what happens to mountain bikers? They can die with helmets. What happened if they aren't wearing it? So
I agree.
Thank you very much for your response here. We weren't able to get to our restudying story this afternoon, but we had some really lovely responses, so we'll come to that for our Friday session. Says in The Guardian, I quit my boring job for university at 30. The expense was daunting, but my self-worth soared. You've been wonderful. Thank you very much for coming to the panel.
Good to see you as always, Wallace.
Sainsbury. Great to see you.
And Olivia Esterhazy, you've been absolutely fantastic, and I will invite you back again, Olivia.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Keep working on that moustache, Wallace.
Yes.
I'm trying.
Persevere.
It's a long journey sometimes, isn't it, Mark? All right. I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow for Friday, 3:45. Till then, bye. Checkpoint next.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere nei, the World Health Organization declares the coronavirus outbreak a pandemic and calls on governments to take urgent action. Donald Trump obliges. He bans travel between Europe and the US for the next 30 days. So what does that actually mean? All basketball games are off. The NBA suspends its season. Hollywood star Tom Hanks and his wife Rita Wilson both have coronavirus. Meanwhile, New Zealand has no plans to immediately reveal a major COVID-19 stimulus package after Australia unveils one today. But the New Zealand government does roll out some drought relief. Our Ministry of Health says both schools and businesses should prepare for the worst, and we'll have the latest as our markets close and take a dive.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. President Donald Trump has suspended all travel to the United States from European countries for 30 days because of the coronavirus pandemic. The restriction, which takes effect on Saturday, does not apply to the United Kingdom. Mr. Trump says the speed of the spread of the virus in Europe shows him this drastic measure needs to be taken. But addressing Americans from the Oval Office, he said the US can handle any threat that comes its way.
This is not a financial crisis. This is just a temporary moment of time that we will overcome together as a nation and as a world.
Donald Trump. The US State Department has since advised Americans to reconsider travelling abroad. It says it supports restrictions that limit travel mobility, including quarantine and border prevention. Asia Pacific markets have been rocked by Mr. Trump's announcement, and the NZX Top 50 index has closed down in line with other major markets in the region. Australia's ASX 200 is down by just over 7%, and Japan's Nikkei by 5.4%. And just over an hour ago, Auckland Airport placed itself in a trading halt. It says it will make an announcement by the time the market reopens on Monday. The Prime Minister expects to get advice on further border restrictions by tomorrow, and today's new US travel ban announcement will be a factor in future decisions. Jacinda Ardern says the government has been trying to plan one step ahead to protect public health as the outbreak worsens, and further closures may be needed.
Within the next 24 hours, I expect I will be getting updated advice. We've been moving on a continual basis to make sure that we are maintaining those tough restrictions that is protecting the health of New Zealanders.
Jacinda Ardern. The Health Ministry says if there's a community outbreak of the disease in this country, schools will be closed, mass gatherings banned, and people will be asked to work from home. The Ministry's Director General Ashley Bloomfield says New Zealand needs to have all the tools ready and be prepared to use them preemptively.
And the WHO Director General says this every time he speaks. It is not an inevitability that we get an out-of-control pandemic here. It can be controlled, and what he's doing is encouraging countries to learn from those who have successfully put in control measures.
Ashley Bloomfield says the number of confirmed cases is still 5. About $3 million of the $10 million government drought package announced this afternoon will go to Northland. The Far North Mayor, John Carter, has welcomed the announcement but says the region must still conserve water, even though small amounts of recent rain have given the grass a tinge of green.
We need more than a good rain. We actually, that's one of the things that we've got to keep reminding people. We've had some rain, the grass has greened up a little, but it's a green drought. Our water tables are low, our rivers are low, and so we're not out of this by a long way yet.
John Carter. The money is for immediate relief, covering such things as water delivery and stock welfare needs. An anti-corruption unit is being created by the police to investigate corruption within the organisation itself. Commissioner Mike Bush says while police corruption is rare, it is important to remain vigilant against attempts at infiltration by organised crime groups. The National Integrity Unit will be led by a detective superintendent, and its specialist investigators will be based in Wellington. Cody dieback has been found in Puketi forest trees in the far northwest of Kerikeri. The discovery has horrified Forest and Bird, which is calling on the government to fund and implement a management plan for the disease already sitting before Cabinet. Spokesperson Dean Bagent Mercer says out-of-control feral pig populations have spread the disease in Northland. Cody dieback is already present in parts of Auckland and Waikato. It's coming up to 4 minutes past 5. The NBA has suspended its season because of the coronavirus, and New Zealand's Stephen Adams is among the basketballers quarantined. A game between Adams's Oklahoma City Thunder and the Utah Jazz was abruptly postponed after a positive test on a player. US media says all players from both teams have been quarantined in the arena. However, the league says the affected player, reportedly Jazz centre Rudy Gobert, was not in the arena. The NBA says the league is being suspended until further notice. Hurricanes hooker Dane Coles says he's cherishing every time he gets on the field at this stage of his career. Coles will make his first start since last year's World Cup and tomorrow night's Super Rugby game against the Chiefs in Hamilton. The 33-year-old isn't getting carried away with his promotion to starting lineup.
I love getting back to this position, and even if it's 16, like I'm probably cherishing every time I put a jersey on at that moment, to be fair. You know, I love this team and it's just awesome to be back, and the things I've had, I just have to work harder to get back, and you know, I'm just enjoying my time. If it's with the 2 or the 16 on my back, time I get to call in that yellow jersey it's a good day for me.
Dane Coles. And defending champions Liverpool have been knocked out of football's Champions League, going down to Atletico Madrid. The all-white away games against Oman and Bahrain this month have been cancelled because of coronavirus risks. That's the news.
Coronavirus declared a pandemic.
Pandemic is a word that, if misused, can cause unreasonable fear.
Harvey Weinstein is sentenced.
For all those who are still preying on women, that gamble is likely not to pay off for you anymore.
Bernie Sanders won't give up despite the pressure.
While our campaign has won the ideological debate, we are losing the debate over electability.
Bringing you global news and local issues. Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Great Barrier Island, a few showers, some possibly heavy today. Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula mainly fine, a few showers in the east tomorrow. Waikato to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty and Central High Country, fine weather. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Waitatapa and Wellington, fine breaks today, a few showers north of Wairoa, mainly fine tomorrow. For Nelson, Buller and Westland, partly cloudy, odd light showers today. For the remainder of the South Island, fine, apart from areas of cloud or fog tomorrow morning and night, cloud lingering in the afternoon in Southland and Clutha. Chatham Islands often cloudy, a few light showers today. RNZ National, it's 6.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's begin tonight with the World Health Organization declaring a global pandemic and US President Donald Trump's reaction.
Taking early, intense action, we have seen dramatically fewer cases of the virus in the United States than are now present in Europe. The European Union failed to take the same precautions and restrict travel from China and other hotspots. As a result, a large number of new clusters in the United States were seeded by travelers from Europe. After consulting with our top government health professionals, I have decided to take several strong but necessary actions to protect the health and well-being of all Americans. To keep new cases from entering our shores, we will be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States for the next 30 days. The new rules will go into effect Friday at midnight. Testing capabilities are expanding rapidly day by day. We are moving very quickly. The vast majority of Americans, the risk is very, very low.
So, all travel between Europe and the US suspended for a month. That does not include the UK. The markets have just closed and taken a dive in response. Auckland Airport is in a trading halt. Ryman Health, Sky City, Air New Zealand, Tourism Holdings and A2 Milk have all taken huge hits. We'll have more on this coming up. In the US, the NBA has been suspended. That season is suspended immediately. And Hollywood star Tom Hanks and his wife Rita Wilson, who are currently in Australia, have announced that they have both tested positive for coronavirus, and we will go to the States later in the program. New Zealand has no plans to immediately roll out a major COVID-19 stimulus package like the one unveiled in Australia today. The Australian government's announced a multi-billion-dollar plan to keep businesses afloat, including direct payouts, cash in hand. The government here is keeping the option open if the crisis gets much worse, but it's made clear that that's not its priority now. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Australia unveiling a multi-billion-dollar band-aid, a major economic stimulus package designed to ward off recession due to COVID-19.
This plan is about keeping Australians in jobs. This plan is about keeping business in business.
The Australian PM Scott Morrison unleashing a torrent of spending, some $17.6 billion. It includes one-off cash payments, $750 for every beneficiary, including pensioners. Small and medium businesses can also expect injections of up to $25,000 to help pay wages or hire extra staff.
Australians know that this needs to be the priority, and our government agrees with that priority, and that's why we've taken the decision to put these measures in place.
But on this side of the ditch, it's a different story. The government so far has been talking millions, not billions. and its focus is clearly on targeted support rather than broad brush measures like cash payments or tax cuts.
What we've wanted to do, and the strong message from the business community is, and I just met with Business New Zealand yesterday, is make sure what you do is tailored.
And so Jacinda Ardern and the Finance Minister Grant Robertson have instructed officials to work up a business support package, with wage subsidies ready to roll out quickly to the worst-hit sectors.
Generic cash payments wouldn't necessarily support those who might be experiencing larger-scale impacts versus small businesses, or necessarily for the time period required. We're designing something, and it's only, of course, waiting till next week, that will be able to provide really direct support.
In fact, the government's trying to paint Australia as playing catch-up. Mr Robertson points to the $12 billion spend up on infrastructure announced last year.
So I feel like in many ways we're ahead of the curve.
Australia has been called upon to put in place infrastructure packages for some time. We'd already done that several weeks ago, and that's part of the thinking that they're only doing now.
Nationals already called for tax cuts. It now wants the government to crack open the Provincial Growth Fund and redirect that funding into job support. It's not so sure cash payments are warranted just yet, but its finance spokesperson Paul Goldsmith says by now the wage subsidy scheme should be up and running.
One of the advantages of being a small country is that we are nimble, and usually nimble means that New Zealand responds faster than the big countries. But what we're seeing now is actually the big countries are responding more quickly than we are.
The Finance Minister is keeping his options open if the global economy takes a significant and sustained dive. He says officials are developing a suite of measures for that possibility, and that could include cash payments down the line. Just not right now. Mr Robertson flies to Australia tomorrow for a pre-arranged meeting with his counterpart. The two will compare notes on how their economies are faring, as well as their different approaches to COVID-19. Atu iti whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Craig McCulloch.
Let's go live now to the United States and our correspondent Nick Harper, who is in Washington, D.C. Nick, US President Donald Trump has announced some extensive travel ban here. What does this all mean?
Yeah, some pretty drastic action from President Trump. For the next 30 days, starting at midnight on Friday, all flights, all travel from Europe to the United States will be suspended. Essentially, he doesn't want any Europeans coming to the US to spread coronavirus. He's saying that now is the time to protect Americans. There are some exceptions. People in the UK and Ireland will be able to come to the US. Americans who are in Europe will be able to come back to the US as long as they're properly screened. He made the announcement during a primetime address in the Oval Office. Now, in that address, he also said that trade would be affected, not just holidaymakers, but any trade coming from Europe to the US would also be affected. He's had to put out a tweet since then clarifying that trade would not be affected. It's not clear whether he misspoke or whether it was just written down wrong in his notes. But he's saying that trade will not be affected, but certainly very drastic action, suspending all of those flights. It'll have a huge impact on Europeans, but also on the airline industry, which is already suffering.
Yeah, so what's the reaction been? Because presumably this is going to have an enormous effect on tourism, business and their bottom lines.
Absolutely. I mean, if we just look at the instant reaction, the futures market for Wall Street reacted instantly to the news, falling fast. It looks like Wall Street will be opening about 5% lower when markets open on Thursday. Of course, that was not the reaction that President Trump was hoping for. He was hoping by giving this very presidential address, just the second time that he's done so from the Oval Office, it would secure markets. It would make them feel much more confident about this. But I think we're seeing such drastic action that investors and markets are concerned, and undoubtedly during the course of Thursday, as people wake up in the US and begin to digest this news, they'll realise that things are changing in a very big way over the coming weeks. We've already seen colleges being closed, large public gatherings have been told not to gather, people are beginning to work from home. There are big changes ahead, and President Trump with this flight plan is showing that very much now is the moment for America to act.
Obviously, he's trying to stem some of the economic fallout, at the same time announcing that, well, there'll be a stimulus package as well.
Yeah, a very large stimulus package, really trying to get people to spend more money by giving them a little bit more money. He's saying that he's going to ask Congress to release $50 billion to allow small businesses to get interest-free loans. He also wants to freeze payroll tax, probably for the rest of the year. Not exactly clear how long, but employers and employees will not have to pay that. He's really trying to get things moving and to make people feel a little bit more confident about the state of the economy. Of course, he has been largely criticised in recent weeks about not acting quickly enough, not having a good enough plan, contradicting his health advisors, and also downplaying the risks of the virus, minimising it each time he talks about it. I think this was an attempt for him to stem not just the economic fallout, but also the PR fallout that he's faced as well.
Nick, you mentioned gatherings of significant numbers of people, and the other thing that's happened today is the NBA has basically canned its season because, one player has turned up as coronavirus positive?
That's right, yeah. Just minutes before a game in Oklahoma, there was a flurry of activity when they realised that one of the people had tested positive, and they called that game off, and they said that all other games, when they finished around the country on Wednesday evening, that would be the end of the season. No more NBA games. That was on top of an announcement earlier from the NCAA, that's the College Basketball Association, saying that the big March Madness tournament would go ahead, but without any spectators, which is a huge blow because revenue-wise, they bring about $900 million annually from ticket sales, but also from TV rights. To not have fans in the stadiums will be a very big blow to them as well.
Thanks, Nick. That is our correspondent in Washington, D.C., Nick Harper there, just giving us the details of those extensive ban that Donald Trump announced this afternoon. And obviously here in New Zealand, there has been reaction on the markets. Nona Peltier, our business correspondent, joins us in the studio. Nona, wow, what a day, what an afternoon.
What a day for sure.
Where did we finish up?
Well, we finished down 5%, right on 5%, just beneath it, at 540 points down. That's 10,333 finishing in the index. That's the top 50 index. That's not as bad as we're seeing across the Tasman. The ASX 200, last time I looked, it was down over 7%. And the Nikkei at 5.5%. That's the Japanese index. Those are big numbers, and we've seen some massive swings over the last few weeks, but I don't think we've seen a day like this. And it's not even a whole day. The market starts opening here.
Yeah, over what time frame did we see this dip?
This is just, this morning we were down, which you would have expected after the announcement of the pandemic just before that. But it really picked up momentum once the announcement was made this afternoon by President Donald Trump about the travel ban. And then, of course, he misspoke, I suppose, about the trade. But that before that was corrected in a tweet, it had already spread through the Asian news channels.
So the ripple effect was that other countries were sitting there thinking that any ship, any cargo, any trade, it wasn't happening either. But we now know it's just people. He's talking about people movement.
Well, that's what he says in his tweet.
Okay. So with this, what was it, around 5% down on the New Zealand market?
5% exactly, actually.
So what about individual companies? Can you give us a bit of an insight?
So just looking at the top 10 index, it was even harder hit. And in there, we would find, for example, Auckland Airport. It put itself into, a trading halt this afternoon, just before the market closed.
And so what does that mean for ordinary people? What's that?
So its shares were suspended from trading. You couldn't buy or sell them on the market. And when that is pending a company announcement, we don't know what that announcement is going to be. So the suspension of trade says that basically it will be pending an announcement by the company, or the trading halt will be lifted by Monday morning when the market opens. So does that mean that they need the weekend to talk about things? Who knows? These days, it's impossible to say. But you can imagine, I was trying to think this through. If you can't travel to Europe through the United States, maybe you come through Asia, maybe you come through New Zealand. I really don't know what the plan is there. That's it's really unprecedented, isn't it?
So other companies like, say, Air New Zealand, were you watching them at all?
Yes, Air New Zealand, it finished down about almost 8%, but they're not commenting. obviously they're going to be heavily affected by this. They're not in a trading halt. Tourism Holdings has exposure to the U.S. market through their camper van business.
So this is the camper van company.
And they were down about 9%. And they put out a notice this afternoon after the travel ban was announced by the government in the United States. And it said it was going to come back to the market again tomorrow. So we'll hear more from them. I spoke to one of the fellows who's the head of research at Fat Profits, and what he said was that this is different from 2008 when we had the last, and this you would definitely say this is on the
global financial crisis.
It's certainly, I would call it a global financial crisis of that kind. He said that it's different. In that case, we moved down steadily, and so we kind of troughed down to the low that it ended up. But the speed at which this is happening, this particular drop, is alarming. And it does reflect a fear and a panic in the market that we haven't seen probably for decades.
Thanks, Nona. That's Nona Pelsier letting us know what's been going on in the markets. And Nona will be back, as usual, after the headlines to talk about the rest of the business news of the day. So, back of the envelope calculations, they put tourism revenue in an ever-increasing black hole thanks to intensifying measures to contain the spread of COVID-19. Tourism Industry Aotearoa's Chief Executive, Chris Roberts, joins me now. Chris, this situation in the US, is it a game changer, do you think?
Good evening, Lisa. It's just another factor in a very rapidly evolving situation. We're getting these sort of blows happening almost on an hourly basis, it feels at the moment. So it just adds to an ever-changing picture, and it certainly will further dampen global travel, and so New Zealand will feel some of the fallout from that.
So can you put a number on the fallout? Rough ballpark figures. How much is this costing our tourism industry?
Well, we were expecting international visitors to spend $18 billion in New Zealand this year. Looking at some, what I would call mid-range scenarios, and not the worst case, looking at what we've actually already seen spent in January, February, and now into March, and what might happen for the rest of the year. If we're still grappling with this issue as we go through the year, we could quite easily see a $7 billion hit. So that $18 billion of expected revenue for New Zealand falling down to $11 billion.
So Chris, just so that we've got these figures clear, $7 billion shaved off tourism if this is still running by the end of the year, roughly speaking.
Yep, and that's equivalent to 8% of our total New Zealand export receipts. So it's a pretty significant blow to the whole economy if that is the outcome. And that's based on still keeping at least 50% of the expected visitors.
And how realistic do you think that is?
I think that's realistic for our biggest and closest market, Australia. It may well be our saving grace if we can keep the Australian visitors coming in. It is our biggest market, and that will be a really strong support. And we also need, of course, the domestic market to be maintained. It's a little alarming at the moment to see that there's some reluctance to travel around New Zealand. We don't have community transmission right now. There is no reason not to travel around New Zealand. There's no reason not to go out to restaurants and cafes, but we are seeing public reluctance to do that. So
Chris, could Air New Zealand help you out with that in terms of domestic travel? Could Air New Zealand help you out with that by having more deals, encouraging people to get out there and travel in their own country?
Absolutely, and they're absolutely willing to do that, and we're in discussions with them and with government. And one of the things the industry is wanting to talk to government about is giving Tourism New Zealand a special dispensation from its mandate, which is only to market internationally. We now think that the time is right for them to have a role in a domestic tourism marketing campaign to encourage New Zealanders to get out and see their own country.
So you are anticipating and are in talks with Air New Zealand about getting some cheap deals out there for Kiwi travellers?
Well, it's not always about cheap deals. It's just about putting these deals and opportunities together. And yes, we're in communication. The good thing is there's a huge amount of communication going on. I think I've been in 7 COVID-19 related meetings today. So everyone's talking to everybody else, and we're trying to share information and get the right decisions taken, and also trying to respond to the news and the events and the changes that are just coming in so rapidly.
So what are your members telling you? Are they laying people off?
Yes. Up to a week ago, it was casual and temporary jobs. That certainly changed. People are now having to lay off permanent staff. We've been working with officials closely this week as they develop the wage subsidy scheme that Cabinet will be considering next week. So that offers some hope that there'll be some subsidies for employers who otherwise would be laying staff off, and that should help keep some people on. There'll also need to be tax relief, I think. There has been messaging around IRD being more flexible with how it treats payments. I mean, that flexibility will need to be quite considerable. Some businesses just won't be in the position to pay their upcoming tax payments, and they need to be allowed to defer those payments.
So this is sending some people to the wall, basically.
Yes, and we've already got a handful of companies we know that have gone to the wall, but that number is likely to increase quite substantially.
So currently, what would you put that number at? A dozen? More?
No more than a dozen probably at the moment, and others that have suspended. Certainly the small businesses who were servicing the China market have basically just closed their doors because they've got no customers. Now, they may be able to restart again if visitors from China start coming in again.
So what's your position on that ban, Chris? What's your position on the ban from people coming directly from China to New Zealand?
We're calling for the government to now lift the travel ban on China and to change it to a ban on just Hubei province. We understand that's still the epicenter of the virus and there's still some issues there. But for the rest of China, they're essentially seeing no new cases now. There are at least 8 countries that have higher infection rates than China. So there is no real justification anymore to have the travel ban. And if we were to lift that, it's a really strong signal to China. It would allow the airlines to schedule flights, get freight moving into China again, and get those passengers moving in to China again. So we think, looking at what's happening on a global situation, we may see further travel bans and travel restrictions on other markets, but the one that's been in place on China is no longer really justifiable.
So there are different rules for people coming from Italy and Korea. They only have to self-isolate for 14 days but are allowed into the country. Why do you think it's different for people coming from China?
I think it was the first ban put on, and it was to try and contain New Zealand's part in playing and containing the virus. But China has actually done a pretty remarkable job at containing the virus within China, but it's got away around the world and in places like Europe. So we need to rethink that position now. There is no point thinking that this is a China issue. The threats now are coming from other parts of the world, and we need to rethink of how we approach the Chinese situation.
Have you spoken to the government about that, and have they given you any indication that they're going to shift on it?
We've spoken at some of the meetings today to official groups, and their role is to feed that information back up to government. So I'm sure those channels are open, so they'll be well aware of our view. And so we realise that there's many aspects to be taken into account here. Health and the health and well-being of New Zealand has been the primary one, and we recognise that has to come first. But we think using good health and science-based decision-making at the moment and looking at where the risks and threats are coming from, that easing the ban on China and allowing some travel to come back makes sense now.
So Cabinet's due to consider that early next week, I believe. What's your message to them right now?
This situation is evolving so rapidly, and measures put in place, we are told, are under constant review. So if they are reviewing some of these issues, then it is time to make some changes.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Tourism Industry Aotearoa's Chief Executive Chris Roberts there, calling on the government to lift the travel ban on people coming from China. The Ministry of Health is looking to toughen up rules around self-isolation to stem the spread of COVID-19. There are more than 2,000 people registered as being in self-isolation in New Zealand, with more than 6,000 having completed isolation. I spoke to the Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, at a press conference this afternoon and asked him how the government's checking up on those people. When you talk about daily monitoring of close contacts, what exactly does that involve? Is it just a phone call?
Usually it's a phone call. However, everybody knows what symptoms they should be looking out for, and if they develop symptoms, then they proactively call in.
How many examples have you seen of people breaching good isolation rules and protocols?
Well, if we're talking about close contacts who are in self-isolation, because of the daily contact and close oversight, those people are very compliant with that.
Has anyone been non-compliant?
Not that I've been told of. I think in the case of others who may be self-isolating because of travel from an area of concern, I've said this before, at the moment we're operating in an environment where it's high trust. I think there's a high degree of acceptability and a high degree of social expectation that people will self-isolate. However, we are also asking for advice about what some of the other options might be to help ensure that we can enforce self-isolation more rigorously if we need to.
Dr. Bloomfield, can you clarify what you mean by looking at further steps to make sure people are isolating? What options are you looking at?
I've asked for advice on some options because I think it's something we need to ensure we know what the options might be.
So why? Why are you worried that as more people are isolated that some people won't follow the rules?
No, I think what we're looking at is how other countries that have been successful in stopping sometimes quite wide community outbreaks, and one of the key actions that helps stop further spread is effective self-isolation, and what we're interested in doing is seeing how would you apply that in the New Zealand setting.
Does that include legal options to enforce isolation?
I absolutely think that would be one of the options, yes.
So what happens when you might need to shut down a school, for example? Are schools ready and prepared to teach students online, wholesale?
They're very much preparing for that sort of eventuality.
Are they ready to go now?
We would have to ask the Ministry of Education that, but that's something they've been looking at.
And that was the Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, in breaking news, the CAA has grounded 21 helicopters due to safety concerns. We'll have more on this developing story. Europe wakes up to news. US President Donald Trump has suspended all travel between Europe and the United States for 30 days. Harvey Weinstein's lawyer says his 23-year sentence for rape and sexual assault was far harsher than he deserved. And disgust from across the Tasman as two NRL Bulldogs players are stood down for bringing two teenage schoolgirls back to their team hotel after a school visit. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Get in touch regarding the travel ban. How is it affecting you? Also, do you think we should lift the ban on people coming direct to New Zealand from China? And is your school prepared? Have you been told what would happen if it has to shut down? You can get in touch via text 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get to the headlines now with Susanna.
The government has announced a national drought relief package. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern made the announcement this afternoon while visiting drought-hit farms in Northland. She says the rural sector is doing it tough with sustained droughts in many areas and a plan for long-term climate problems is needed. And the drought package includes $10 million for immediate relief, including water delivery and stock welfare. About $3 million of the money will go to Northland, where the Far North District Mayor John Carter says the region must still conserve water even after small amounts of rain have given the grass a tinge of green. The American President Donald Trump today declared sweeping new travel restrictions on Europe in a bid to combat the spread of the coronavirus. In a televised address, he's said all travel from Europe will be suspended for the next month. Mr. Trump says the measure is part of the most aggressive and comprehensive effort to confront a foreign virus in modern history. And a short time later, the US State Department advised all Americans to reconsider travelling abroad. The Health Ministry says New Zealand can expect closed schools, mass gatherings banned, and people working from home if there's a community outbreak of the disease. The Ministry's Director General Ashley Bloomfield says New Zealand needs to have all the tools ready and be prepared to use them preemptively. Asia Pacific markets have been rocked by Mr Trump's announcement, and the NZX Top 50 index has closed down 5% in line with other major markets in the region. And this afternoon, Auckland Airport placed itself in a trading halt. An anti-corruption unit is being created by the police to investigate corruption within the organisation itself. Commissioner Mike Bush says while police corruption is rare, it is important to remain vigilant against attempts at infiltration by organised crime groups. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. And if you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Time now for business news. Nona Peltier joins me again in the studio. Thanks, Nona. More generally, let's talk about how New Zealanders are reacting to the spread of the COVID-19 virus.
Yeah, so one of the biggest research companies in New Zealand has done a survey over the past weekend asking New Zealanders how they're feeling about it. And you would have thought they'd be most concerned about their health, but no, they're more concerned about their pocketbook. In fact, about, a third are concerned that this will lead to an economic recession and what that might mean to them. So I spoke with the chief executive of a company called Kantar New Zealand, Jason Shoebridge, and he says that, yes, the COVID-19 virus is weighing heavily on New Zealanders' mind, even though it hasn't yet reached epidemic proportions here. And this is what he had to say.
I expect if we went out now and did this research, we'd find that people are more fearful in general, but I think we'd still see the same result, that people are more fearful about the economic, or New Zealanders are more fearful about the economic impact as opposed to getting sick. I mean, since we've done this research, we've obviously had 4 or 5 days of, continual economic bad news, as you say, culminating today with the US shutting their borders to travellers from Europe. So I think what we would see is a similar pattern, that people are more concerned about economic recession than getting sick, but we would see in general heightened sense of fear, I guess, in terms of all of those aspects.
And that's Jason Shoebridge there of Kantar Research in New Zealand. So what happened on the markets? Lots of things to this afternoon in a very short period of time.
Talk us through us. Give us a big picture first.
Okay, so we are in bear market territory. We talked about that before. So the correction is like a 10% drop. This is like we're talking 20%. This is massive drop. And it's happened very quickly. And what really sort of set it off was, well, first of all, earlier this morning we had the World Health Organization talk about this now becoming a pandemic. And then yesterday we missed out on hearing about the economic, package that the U.S. was going to announce. They didn't come up with that yesterday. That upset the markets. Today, we heard more about what the economic package was, but that was totally overshadowed by the announcement that travel ban between Europe and the United States. And so people focused on that. And in addition, that they heard that this was going to also affect cargo and so on. That was corrected in a tweet by Donald Trump later. But the damage had already been done, and the sentiment definitely turned sour. So what we saw in the Asia-Pacific area is a very quick reaction. And the New Zealand market finished down 5%, as we'd heard earlier. The ASX 200, which is the key market indicator there at the Australian Stock Exchange, it's been going from like 7% down to 5% down and back and forth, which indicates there's probably some profit taking there. Certainly there must be some bargain hunters around as well, because there's, it's moving back and forth. And look, I honestly can't say what's going to happen through the rest of the trading day, because it's still early days in terms of early hours of the trading day, which finishes up in New York. But you can expect the futures and everything else is really at rock bottom. The Asian markets are at their lowest levels since early 2019. So we've lost everything that we gained in the past year. Stock futures were down more than 4.5%. And the markets are expecting worse side effects as Europe opens, because, of course,
it's them
heavily impacted. Yes, of course.
So the final number on close was what?
Okay, so the final number was the drop of 540 points. That's the 5%. 10,333 is our finishing number. And, surprisingly, though, our currency is holding fairly steady at 62.6 US cents, 96.8 Australian and 48.8 British pence. And I'm sure this isn't the last market report we're going to hear in the next 24 hours.
No, busy days ahead. Thank you, Nona. Nona Peltier with our business wrap. The Prime Minister has announced a relief package for drought-hit areas around New Zealand, unlocking millions of dollars in financial support. Jacinda Ardern visited the far north today to see the parched conditions for herself and said it highlighted the increase in extreme weather events across the country. The package includes $10 million for immediate relief, like delivering water and stock welfare. But some farmers say it's still not enough, with the dire situation taking its toll. Andrew McRae reports.
The Prime Minister made the announcement while visiting drought-hit farms in Northland today. Jacinda Ardern says the rural sector is doing it tough.
Everyone accepts we are in an environment now where we are experiencing more extreme weather events, more sustained dry periods, changes in our environment. It makes sense for us to plan long-term solutions, not just those that get us over particular periods of drought, but prepares us for a period in the future where we may again have longer, drier summers and less rain in our winter time.
Far North Mayor John Carter says while there's been some scattered rain in the region, the situation is very serious.
We're calling it a green drought now because it actually hasn't made any difference to the water tables, to the rivers, so our supply is still dire.
Will Ty is a dairy farmer near Kaitaia. He says the drought means buying in feed, so costs skyrocket.
From Christmas till May, we'll spend an extra $70,000 on feed. And then plus we'll have to do some regrassing and things like that to make sure the farm performs next year. So we're looking at $150,000+ of extra cost.
The relief package comes hard on the heels of a large-scale adverse event declaration, which covers the entire North Island, parts of the South Island and the Chatham Islands, and unlocks up to $2 million of funding support for farmers and growers. In North Canterbury, farmers are still coming to terms with the latest drought. Their last one ran between 2014 and 2017. Chair of the Huranui Adverse Events Committee, Winton Daly, says the declaration is comforting, but the financial support for individual farmers isn't huge.
The harsh reality is that in terms of the farm business, there's very little direct help, financial help.
Mr Daly says while he wouldn't call it tokenism, the new funding is clearly not designed to get farmers out of their financial difficulties. He says many farmers during the last drought were down about $1 million in lost income and direct costs, and many of them are still recovering and have huge debt.
While they've had two good production seasons in the interim, many of them will still be hurting from the costs and the debt that they incurred during the last one. So that's the magnitude of direct assistance, and I don't think you'll find any government will come to the party, with that kind of money.
The chair of the Rural Support National Council, Neil Baitup, says the declaration means extra support and recognition of the severity of what is a widespread drought. He says the new funding will help with extra rural support workers.
It will free up some money for technical support and advice to farmers who are in very dire situations, and it'll free up RAPs, rural assistance payments, to be made, which is really just putting food on the table for those people who actually have no income at all to do that.
NIWA forecaster Chris Brandolino says very little rain's expected over the next few days, but a tropical cyclone is forming over the Coral Sea and it may head this way.
There is a chance that gets close enough to New Zealand to bring some rainfall, say sometime next week, Tuesday and Wednesday sort of ish. Now, it's certainly not a guarantee.
He says if the cyclone does bring rain, it'll probably be just in the upper North Island. For Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
Meanwhile, 750 kilometres east of the South Island, farmers on the Chatham Islands are also feeling the pressure of drought. The cluster of islands were included in this morning's large drought declaration. Among the roughly 600 residents, there's 30 or so farmers, including Tony Anderson, who runs 5,000 sheep and 500 cattle at Wharikodi Station. Mr Anderson says it's not just the drought worrying farmers there, but also the impact that COVID-19 is having on the meat and seafood industries, which are a vital part of the Chatham's economy. Mr Anderson told our rural reporter Maya Burry while the season started well, towards the end of December things started going downhill.
And we're at a point now where there's no feed, and we're expecting some autumn rain shortly, hopefully. The lambs grew very well earlier on, but they're sort of come to a standstill. Most people are mentioning that They're losing weight and they're not as good as they should be, but I guess our issue is getting them to market as much as the weather.
In the South Island and North Island, there's been a lot of talk about the coronavirus and how there's been a big backlog getting stock into the works, partly because, there's less product moving overseas, but also because it's really starting to dry up, so a lot of farmers are trying to offload all at the same time. How is the situation where you are?
It's affecting us in the same way, except it's somewhat magnified as there's limited space on the ship, as well as when you get the stock to New Zealand as to whether it can be the correct way to sell it and space. So some farmers are finding it difficult to know whether to ship at all if the markets are depressed in New Zealand, but if we don't ship, then we're going to have constrictions in space later on in the year, which will be quite critical.
I appreciate this is news to you. You weren't aware that there'd been an adverse event declaration for your neck of the woods, but are you pleased to hear that there is support available? Yes, and I'm sure there'll be farmers here that would need it, although it's a small place. Many farms are in different circumstances, so I'm sure of it. And I understand there's a government party coming to the island in relation to the coronavirus to talk about packages that are available, so hopefully some farmers get to attend there as well. There's quite a big seafood industry around your area as well. It's come to a complete and utter stop. All the fishermen can't go fishing, and whilst it was towards the end of the season, that's viewed with quite concern, and certainly it's affected the airlines. They were able to export the crayfish that was normally caught. So it's early days, and there's sort of quite a large storm brewing behind the scenes, which, aside from the public health issues which everyone's worried about, we've no idea how the economic effects of it is going to transpire. And in a small economy like ours, it doesn't take much for it to bite very deeply.
That's Chatham Islands farmer Tony Anderson speaking to Maya Burry. The Agricultural Minister says while farmers in the Chathams were a tight-knit and resilient group, it was important they received the same support offered to farmers on the mainland. He says it'll be working with farmers there who may need help arranging feed or stock or other support. It is about 13 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do get in touch about anything you've heard on the program this evening. If you're on the farm in one of those areas where the big dry is, let us know how you're getting on. That $10 million relief package for immediate relief, is it enough? Let us know your thoughts. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at checkpointrnz, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's the eve of the much-awaited National Rugby League season, with the Warriors taking on Newcastle across the ditch on Saturday night. But in what's become a regular tradition, a sex scandal is proving a distraction before kick-off. The Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs Club has stood down 2 players after they were found to have brought teenage schoolgirls back to the team hotel after a school visit. Kiwi second rower Corey Hawara-Naira and winger Jaden Ockenbaugh didn't break any laws, but did break the NRL Code of Conduct. Today, there's reports in Australia that Ockenbaugh might face the sack as published social media posts reveal him asking a 16-year-old girl for a topless photo. Our reporter Alex Perrottet spoke to veteran commentator Ray Warren and asked him how he thought it rated along the long list of NRL scandals.
It probably depends from which angle you want to look at it. I keep in mind that it's not an illegal act that these 2 fellows have indulged in. That's if I'm reading the correct story. But from the game's point of view, it's a terrible thing for them to suffer as we enter the opening game of the season tonight.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of talk about, this isn't illegal, but there's certainly scandal and outrage in some quarters that they were on I guess you could say, a professional work endeavour, and then took advantage of the fact that that they had further contact with what were basically schoolgirls. So it's not a great look, is it?
Oh no, I'm not defending that at all. As a matter of fact, I'm quite horrified by it because clubs visit schools. I might also add they visit hospitals, but let's concentrate on the story. Clubs often visit schools and they go there to promote the club and they go there to promote the game. But then to take advantage of whatever meeting took place at the school or on the telephone afterwards, I'm not sure of. But they've missed the point completely, these two players. They have a duty to the club. They know the rules. It's in their contracts. They're lectured on these things just about every week that they go to training, and they've broken those rules set by the NRL and by the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs.
The Bulldogs themselves, known often as, and historically, as the family club. I think that all kind of melted away with the long in the past now scandal on Coffs Harbour. We're talking more than 10 or 15 years ago now, but this is I guess another dent in the reputation of the family club at Canterbury Bankstown.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I used to sit at Belmore and look over on the hill, and you're quite right. It was called the Family Hill, and they were known as the Family Club. But you're quite right. Memories of Coffs Harbour, they still get brought up. They linger on, and if any club can't afford something like this, it's Canterbury. I feel sorry for the good people that belong to Canterbury, though. You know, I mean, you wouldn't meet a nicer person than Steve Mortimer, for instance. Greg Brentnell comes to mind. Some really beautiful people have played for Canterbury down through the years. Les Johns years ago, but yeah, I don't know that they can hold that banner out the front anymore. But look, again, I emphasise this was not an illegal thing. What it was basically a crime against the game and the club. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, and the CEO, Andrew Hill, has stood them down. It seems that there's less and less tolerance for this sort of thing these days.
That's right.
I mean, just trying to step into their shoes a little bit, is it social media? Is that what is just so fraught? You see the messages that have been published now between one of these players and the particular girl, and obviously her privacy has been respected there. But I think, geez, you know, it must be so difficult, these guys, with the power that they have and with the messages that come their way, the interests that come their way. It's pretty hard to say no when we've got that power and you've got that following.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I'm getting on in years. As a youngster, I didn't have to deal with the temptations and the attractions out there that the youngster has to deal with today. Things like social media, the drug community. I didn't have to deal with that because I was raised in the 40s and the early 50s. So, you know, there's a lot more pressure, I think, on young people today, and there are probably more temptations out there. But at the same time, they know the rules, and clubs suffer. I think you'll find Canterbury has lost a prospective major sponsor as a result of it. Keep in mind, though, you know, it's in some ways it's a little bit like the Israel Folau case. We're talking about something that wasn't illegal according to the statutes and legislation. He did nothing wrong except he quoted his Bible, but he got the sack because it cost Rugby Australia an absolute fortune as sponsors ran to get away from what he was saying.
Yeah, and that seems to be what's hit Canterbury now, and of course provides such a distraction for what's the beginning of a big season. There was that great promotion video the other day going back to the Simply the Best years, and I guess that's what everyone wants to keep focusing on. But how do you feel as a commentator, an eminent commentator, and so central to the game? How big a distraction is this really on the eve of the big kickoff?
Well, I've got to try and stay focused on what I have to do tonight, and that is to try and broadcast the matches as well as I possibly can. Naturally, I'm very disappointed, as a matter of fact, because in all of my career as a caller in rugby league, and it's over 50 years now, I've always tried to promote the game rather than demote the game, and that's been my philosophy. So when you like that, it hurts a lot, believe me.
And that's veteran Australian commentator Ray Warren. The New Zealand Olympic Committee isn't letting speculation around the coronavirus and this year's Games get in the way of further additions to the Kiwi team. Canoe slalom athletes Luca Jones and Calum Gilbert were officially added to the New Zealand roster for Tokyo today. And despite mixed messages out of Japan in the past couple of days, the pair say they remained full steam ahead with their preparations. Clay Wilson reports.
One has been to 3 Olympics. One is off to their first. But Luca Jones and Calum Gilbert are equally excited to be in the New Zealand team for Tokyo. A reserve for the Rio 2016 Games, Gilbert then quit his day job as a software engineer to become a full-time athlete. He thanks that and the family batch for his Olympic dream coming true.
My family have a batch on one of the Rotorua lakes, and so when I was younger I got out in a kayak a lot and just loved it. So when I hit high school I got into a bit of an after-school training thing at Waimarino, the same place as Luca actually started. The teacher in charge there snapped us up, and after one race I was hooked, and I've been hooked ever since.
Gilbert's recent progression has been helped by a unique coaching arrangement. Based at Okere Falls near Rotorua, the 24-year-old is mentored remotely by Paul McDermott, a senior lecturer in sport, exercise and nutrition at Auckland's Massey University.
So I send him video of training and of some other people competing before I race, and then so we make a plan for what I'm going to do. I talk to him on the phone on the race day, and then he watches online and we get feedback after that.
Gilbert has the benefit of heading to his first Olympics with a reigning Games silver medalist. With a World Championships bronze also now under her belt, Luca Jones is heading to Tokyo with a different mindset.
I guess for me now the motivation isn't just to go to the Games, it's to go to the Games and really achieve something. I mean, in Rio that was my goal, but I was more of an outside chance, and now I'm in a lot better position having won a medal at the World Champs last year.
After winning silver at Rio in the kayak class, this year Jones will also compete in another discipline, with the introduction of the C1 canoe class for women for the first time at the Olympics. She likens the difference between the events to skiing and snowboarding. And coach Campbell Walsh says the decision to do both has created a juggling act.
We do prioritise kayak because that's where our heart is, and realistically our stronger medal chances in kayak. So we do more training in kayak, but we still need to try and do enough in the C1s because really she is an outside chance of a medal in that as well.
Helping make that a possibility is the state-of-the-art Wero White Water Park next to Auckland's Southern Motorway. Opened just prior to the 2016 Olympics, the course is very similar to the Tokyo venue, and Jones says it's been a game changer.
We always had to kind of travel overseas during the New Zealand summer to spend time on artificial venues as well as being away for the season. So it was just really exhausting, and to have this 8 minutes from my house and, you could hold an Olympic Games here. It's that good.
All that remains is to see if those benefits will actually go on show at this year's Games. NZOC boss Karen Smith insists speculation on any postponement or cancellation is just that. And Calum Gilbert says he's doing the only thing they can do in the circumstances.
I mean, there's a lot of information out there, and I think sometimes it can be hard to find the truth and to find what's real. So, we just carry on with our day-to-day lives and training and trying to get into the best shape we can be, expecting the Games to go ahead.
Expecting and hoping, especially when your first Olympics awaits. Moti hotaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Clay Wilson aho.
Getting so much feedback from you all about coronavirus and travel bans. This is off the back of the US banning travellers from Europe into the US for 30 days. And also tourism industry Aotearoa here in New Zealand wanting the travel ban from China lifted immediately. This person says with regard to lifting the ban on travel from China, lifting that ban will not save a single life. However, keeping it in place might. Profit is not a valid reason for taking risks when life is at stake. Someone else says we should close our borders, including from Australia. Only exception, New Zealand citizens and residents with policed self-isolation. Keep the ban on China. Still a lot of cases there. Tourism people are only concerned about their dollars. And this one says, I can't believe that idiot wants travel to China to resume when there are 80,000 cases still rife in China. We don't need people like him putting us at risk for the sake of making a few dollars. Another person says, Tammy's been in touch. This is about schools preparing themselves for shutdowns. Tammy says, schools prepared to teach online. I'm a teacher. We've heard absolutely nothing about this at my school. They're dreaming if they think that's possible. We're not geared up for anything like that. And another person says, employees are not required to be paid if they self-isolate. Many people who have run out of sick leave will go to work because they can't afford 2 weeks without pay. Interestingly, Australia has announced a package for contractors and people needing to self-isolate so they do get paid. I wonder if we'll do the same. This one says the US have left it too late for travel lockdowns. They are hardly testing anyone. The human cost will be enormous. Another one says we should close our borders like the Americans. Jacinda is weak, they say.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. Asia Pacific markets have been rocked by today's shock announcement that the United States is banning entry by travellers from the European continent and recommending American citizens reconsider travelling abroad. President Donald Trump announced the 30-day ban in an Oval Office address this afternoon. In line with other major markets in the region, the NZX Top 50 index has fallen by 5%. Australia's ASX 200 was down by about 5.5% late this afternoon, and Japan's Nikkei by almost as much. RNZ correspondent Nick Harper told Checkpoint that Wall Street also immediately reacted downward.
That was not the reaction that President Trump was hoping for. He was hoping by giving this very presidential address, just the second time that he's done so from the Oval Office, it would secure markets. It would make them feel much more confident about this. But I think we're seeing such drastic action that investors and markets are concerned. And undoubtedly, during the course of Thursday, as people wake up in the US and begin to digest this news, they'll realise that things are changing in a very big way over the coming weeks.
Nick Harper reports that Mr Trump is trying to fire the chair of the Federal Reserve have further upset the markets. Despite the turmoil, the New Zealand dollar is holding steady. A tourism leader is calling for the government to ease the travel ban on China. Chris Roberts, who's the chief executive of Tourism New Zealand Aotearoa, says people are already reluctant to travel, even though there's no community transmission of COVID-19 in New Zealand. Mr Roberts told Checkpoint the country could lose $7 billion in tourism revenue if the situation continues to the end of the year.
We're calling for the government to now lift the travel ban on China and to change it to a ban on just Hubei province. We understand that's still the epicentre of the virus and there's still some issues there. But for the rest of China, they're essentially seeing no new cases now.
Chris Roberts says it's important to maintain the Australian and domestic markets. The Civil Aviation Authority has grounded 21 helicopters because of safety concerns. The Director of Civil Aviation, Graham Harris, says the action arises from recent inspection and monitoring visits to a maintenance organisation that repairs and overhauls aircraft with Rolls-Royce Allison 250 series turbine engines. He says that organisation has determined that 41 engines on helicopters currently in service around the world need parts repaired or replaced. Mr Harris says as a result, 21 helicopters in New Zealand are grounded. A police officer, first on the scene of an alleged rape, changed his story after being told he was under investigation himself. The man is a Crown witness in the case against a 29-year-old policeman accused of raping a colleague as she slept. Annika Smith reports.
In his first statement, the officer said the complainant told him she woke up to find the man on top of her. 9 days later, however, he told investigators she'd actually said she woke up to the man raping her. The Auckland District Court jury has now heard the man changed his story after being told that anything he said could be used in an employment investigation into his own behaviour that night. The officer said the warning made him nervous, but his second statement was the truth. Ko Annika Smith aho.
Some Auckland bus services won't be operating during rush hour tomorrow morning because of strike action. The Chief Executive of NZ Bus, Barry Hinckley, says it has failed to reach agreement with bus drivers after 2 days of mediation. He says the company offered to continue mediation or move to facilitation under the Employment Relations Authority, but the unions representing the drivers declined the offer. However, one of the unions involved says that's not the case. Tramways National Secretary Gary Froggatt says NZ Bus hasn't improved its offer since the last round of mediation. It's 6:04. New Zealand basketballer Stephen Adams is among the players quarantined by the NBA's decision to suspend its season because of the coronavirus. A game between Adams's Oklahoma City Thunder and the Utah Jazz was abruptly postponed after a player returned a positive test. US media say all players from both teams were quarantined in the arena. The NBA says the league is being suspended until further notice. Australian opening batsman David Warner says he enjoys the rivalry with New Zealand and is excited about the start of the Chappell-Hadley one-day series in Sydney tomorrow. Australia are coming off 5 straight ODI losses in India and South Africa, while the Black Caps have had a convincing Test series win over India. While many Australians see the series with England as the traditional rivalry, Warner says New Zealand is up there.
Oh, rivalry is always big between us. Obviously, a short flight across the Tasman, and as I said, they're a great unit. They're a great bunch of lads. But when they play competitively and in a great spirit of the game. And they always put a great challenge on the park. And as I said before, they had a few injuries during the test series, but they got great depth as well.
David Warner. And the Crusaders are resting a swag of All Blacks for their Super Rugby match against the Sunwolves on Saturday. Cody Taylor, Richie Mo'unga, Jack Goodhue, Scott Barrett and Joe Moody won't feature in the Brisbane game. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Alison Ballance is on the trail of some kakapo sperm. The fresher the better. This week's overseas correspondent, Reem Abbas, is on the line from Sudan. At the front line of the debate between tolerance and fundamentalism, our toxicologist, Leo Shep, explains why you don't necessarily want honeybees mixing with rhododendrons. And Raymond Sangapolitelli is keeping it real in South Auckland on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service, it's until midnight tomorrow. Northland and Great Barrier Island, a few showers, some possibly heavy today. Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, mainly fine, a few showers in the east tomorrow. Waikato to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty and Central High Country, fine weather. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, fine breaks today, a few showers north of Wairoa, mainly fine tomorrow. Nelson, Bulla and Westland, partly cloudy, odd light showers today. For the remainder of the South Island, fine, apart from areas of cloud or fog morning and night. Cloud lingering into the afternoon in Southland and Clutha. Chatham Islands often cloudy. A few light showers today. RNZ National, it's 6:06.
Thanks, Susanna. And if you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The US President Donald Trump has suspended all travel from Europe to the United States for 30 days because of the coronavirus. In a primetime address from the Oval Office, the President criticised Europe for not doing enough to stop the spread of the coronavirus, and as a result, he's shutting the borders to travellers from there.
This is the most aggressive and comprehensive effort to confront a foreign virus in modern history. I am confident that by counting and continuing to take these tough measures, we will significantly reduce the threat to our citizens, and we will ultimately and expeditiously defeat this virus. From the beginning of time, nations and people have faced unforeseen challenges, including large-scale and very dangerous health threats. This is the way it always was and always will be. It only matters how you respond, and we are responding with great speed and professionalism. Our team is the best anywhere in the world. At the very start of the outbreak, we instituted sweeping travel restrictions on China and put in place the first federally mandated quarantine in over 50 years. We declared a public health emergency and issued the highest level of travel warning on other countries as the virus spread its horrible infection. And taking early, intense action, we have seen dramatically fewer cases of the virus in the United States than are now present in Europe. The European Union failed to take the same precautions and restrict travel from China and other hotspots. As a result, a large number of new clusters in the United States were seeded by travelers from Europe. After consulting with our top government health professionals, I have decided to take several strong but necessary actions to protect the health and well-being of all Americans. To keep new cases from entering our shores, we will be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States for the next 30 days. The new rules will go into effect Friday at midnight. These restrictions will be adjusted subject to conditions on the ground. There will be exemptions for Americans who have undergone appropriate screenings, and these prohibitions will not only apply to the tremendous amount of trade and cargo, but various other things as we get approval. Anything coming from Europe to the United States is what we are discussing. These restrictions will also not apply to the United Kingdom. At the same time, we are monitoring the situation in China and South Korea, and as their situation improves, we will reevaluate the restrictions and warnings that are currently in place for a possible early opening.
The President has since tweeted that the restrictions stops people, not goods, in an apparent rollback on those comments about the rules affecting international cargo. Mr Trump says there will be financial support for individuals and businesses negatively affected by the coronavirus. His move to suspend all travel between Europe and the United States saw our markets here take a dive. Shares in Auckland International Airport have been placed on a trading halt, and Air New Zealand, Ryman Health, A2 Milk, Sky City and Tourism Holdings all took huge hits today. The government here doesn't appear to be readying to follow in the United States' footsteps with its Europe travel ban. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says New Zealand has been tough and swift with border restrictions, and it will continue to be based on expert advice.
Public health for New Zealanders is our number one priority, which is why we have been moving consistently, upgrading our border restrictions. We did that just yesterday, extending those restrictions across Italy. That has meant that we have had some of the toughest restrictions in the world. I expect I'll be getting further advice in the next 24 hours to move again on our border restrictions.
Health Minister David Clark told reporters the US is in a different position to New Zealand.
They are in a situation there where they have a community outbreak on the ground. So their situation is different to ours, but we moved earlier than others on Italy. We've strengthened that again overnight, and today we'll look again at our restrictions.
Will we consider banning flights from all of Europe?
Look, we'll base all of our decisions, as we have done so far, on the best public health information, on the advice of scientists and experts.
And Finance Minister Grant Robertson says the US ban could have an economic impact.
Clearly, a 30-day ban like this will restrict, business travel, for example, and, there are obviously issues currently in the global markets around confidence. So, these kinds of things are part of an evolving situation like this. Economically, these are challenging times. Each event that comes up, we look at the consequences for New Zealand.
And Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters says every country needs to make decisions based on what they think is right. He says the US is clearly responding to the World Health Organization declaring the coronavirus a pandemic.
The Americans have acknowledged where they think their concerns lie, and every country in the world has got to have a response, and I believe that our country, New Zealand, has been way ahead of most. So again, we have made decisions on further matters forward, but they're yet to be announced.
How would you characterise Donald Trump's approach to international relations with this recent move?
Well, that is for the American people to decide, not for me taking a pot shot from this far away. That's not been our pot shot and never will be.
And that's Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters. Business has nosedived for a New Zealand souvenir maker who says shops are shutting and people are being laid off. As you will have heard earlier in the program, tourism industry boss Chris Roberts is calling on the government to lift the travel ban on China, with forecast losses to the sector climbing to $7 billion. Border protections have forced tourists away from our shores, leaving souvenir shops without customers. Roscraft in Rotorua has supplied boutique Kiwiana souvenirs to retailers around around the country since 1976. Think sheepskins and possum earmuffs. Its director, Ros Hunt, says she's having to juggle orders and staff hours to keep workers employed, especially in an area hard hit with forestry shutdowns.
I've heard of some people who are even as doing like a quarter of a normal day. I've heard of people who are just talking to another person who's just closed their door altogether, and we're finding that especially the customers who have Chinese tours that would normally be in a big quantity, they've just closed altogether, quite a number of them, and others of them, they're not sort of permanently closed, but they've like closed their doors. And other ones where people are still travelling, initially the impact wasn't too bad, and our February's probably not been that bad, but the future orders and keeping up is really the problem, because we're just not getting the orders now and everybody's worried about it.
So, Ros, what geographical areas are the worst hit, do you think, at this stage?
Well, all of it, I think. We supply all of New Zealand, so we're doing airport shops, we're in Queenstown, we're in Rotorua. We've been, pretty well New Zealand wide for years, so the effect is pretty hard for most people, I think, in tourism. And also, of course, you hear on the news about the drop in bookings for future tour for Queenstown and adventure travel and things like that. So all of it's not great reading.
So, Ros, talk us through what you supply to these people. What would people recognise or be familiar with?
We're very New Zealand made. I mean, all our products are 90% of them actually made right here in Rotorua. We're big on wool, possum, natural materials. And we have quite a number of people, of course, who work in their own homes. So it's made here. And at the moment I've been juggling out work so that some of our ladies, their husbands have been laid off because of the forestry. So we've got one lady who makes a lot of things for us, but her husband can't take the logs because the port's, his job's taking logs to the port. And, of course, the port's not taking things to China because they're going mouldy over there. So we tried to give her extra work. We've got another couple who both of them have had their jobs knocked down to 2 day a week. So we have quite a few people who make stuff in their own homes. So we're trying to beef up the amount of work, but then we're looking realistically how are we going to sell it. We can't go too mad. Although our stuff's made in New Zealand, a lot of it's made of wool and possum, we still need a thing like a keychain to put it on. Unfortunately, we don't have a keychain manufacturer in New Zealand, so things like componentry are really hard to get. I have a toy sheep that goes bar, and we can't get any noises for him till July, so I can't see he's going to be barring much longer. We're going to have silent ones. There mightn't be tourists around to buy them, so it's a big challenge.
So in terms of your local workers who you're trying to do the best you can by, are you going to be able to keep them all on, do you think?
I'm patiently waiting to see if the government is able to do something. I'm not going to sit here crying poor mouth, but on the other hand, I'm not sure realistically. We have to diversify. We try with something like this, diversifying into some different things, but I went through the SARS epidemic and we ended up making woolly warmers of all things. There you go.
What could the government do to help you, Ros? What would you be looking for there?
Well, I guess realistically some sort of wage subsidies or maybe tax breaks would be helpful. But we're just waiting and seeing really, because we're not the only people in this boat at the moment. I'm sure, talking to our retailers that, everybody's feeling it, not just the manufacturers.
So that just a little something like a wage subsidy would be able to tide you over?
Oh, I think it would help me keep people certainly for longer. We just don't know how long it's going to go on, do we? I mean, none of us know. We don't know if it's 6 months, 2 months, a year. Who knows? I mean, there's so many long-term events that are looking like being cancelled, big events, that, of course, that's going to have an impact on people travelling, and sometimes they come here on their way to somewhere else.
Ros, can you give us an example, like in terms of volumes? Is there an item that you make? Can you give us an example of what you would normally produce of that to what you're doing now?
Well, right now, there's just one customer buys 40 of a particular item, and last order was 3.
Say that again?
They normally buy 40 of a particular item, and this particular customer ordered 3.
That is a significant drop, isn't it?
That was last week, all right, last week. And our order clip on the dispatch table is looking remarkably thin.
What was that particular thing, Ros? What was it?
It's possum fur inner soles that we make for inside people's shoes.
Right,
and
got you.
We'll sell quite a lot of them usually at airport stores and places like that, and that's a fair barometer that it's not doing what it normally does. We're concerned, but we can't really sit here and predict what's going to happen other than be concerned and try and be pragmatic and see what we can do. In my case, I'm trying to make a lot of stuff out of stuff I've got, because having been trading since 1970-something, there is quite a bit of things that I just need to reinvent into something exciting, maybe more for the local market.
So you're innovating, Ros.
Innovation's the only way.
And that is Roscraft director Ros Hunt. Now, just as we came to air, Roscraft contacted us to say they've just had a major attraction in Rotorua ring and cancel all back orders as a result of the downturn. Roscraft's sales manager says it's not looking good. It is 6:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The jury in the trial of a police officer accused of raping his colleague has heard 3 different versions of what happened that night. A policeman is on trial in the Auckland District Court this month, accused of groping a female officer and later raping her as she slept. It's the defence's case the pair had a consensual hookup, but the jury has now heard the man told his boss nothing happened that night. Our court reporter Annika Smith filed this report.
The complainant has told the jury she was sleeping in a kitty motel last February when she woke up to the man raping her. It's the defence's case the woman was awake at the time and any sexual activity was consensual. Today, a senior officer who can't be identified told the jury the accused woke him up that night in a panic.
He ran his fingers through his hair and said, "Boss, I was speaking to earlier in the night and she told me once everyone's gone to bed to go over to her unit to see her." He then went on to say that he went over to her unit, knocked on the door and there was no reply from inside. So he opened the door, went inside, sat on the bed and shook to wake her up.
The sergeant said the accused told him the woman woke up and said, "This is wrong, we can't do this." He asked the man if anything else had happened.
I changed my tone in a manner that this is really important. Looked at me, got his hands out in front, palms up, and went, no, nothing like that.
The sergeant said the accused told him the woman was upset, so he left her to get his roommate. The jury has heard from his roommate, who relayed what the accused shared with him.
He said that they'd hooked up, and while they were doing it, she stopped him. She said she couldn't do it anymore and started crying.
The constable said the woman told him she'd woken up to the man raping her. The jury has now heard he initially told police the woman said she woke up to the man on top of her, but changed his story after he was given notice any statement he gave could be used in an employment investigation into his own behaviour that night. The constable's expressed shock at what he heard was corroborated by their sergeant today, who said the constable was subdued when he returned from the woman's room.
Usually I would expect him and to have some sort of interaction like, "Hey bro, it's all okay, don't worry," or something like that, but there was none of that. There was no conversation between the two of them and very limited eye contact as well.
The sergeant said he was told he needed to go and see the woman himself and found her under a sheet, her legs pulled up to her chest, sobbing and crying. The jury have heard a recording of a conversation they had in which the sergeant asks the woman what she wants to do.
I wanted the words to come out of her that she wanted to go forward and do something about it. Clearly, if she'd said she didn't want to do anything about it, it wouldn't have been the end of the process. But she was very clear with what she wanted to do.
The complainant was medically examined by Dr. Victoria Parler the morning after the alleged rape. Dr. Parler told the jury she found no internal injuries, which didn't surprise her as they were uncommon. She said the presence of an injury didn't mean sexual activity was not consensual, just as the absence of an injury didn't mean a sexual assault hadn't occurred. The trial continues. At the Auckland District Court, this is Annika Smith.
Disgraced film producer Harvey Weinstein has been sentenced to 23 years in prison for rape and sexual assault. His lawyers say it's effectively a life sentence and it's much harsher than many were expecting. But victims have spoken of their joy in an address to the court. Weinstein expressed confusion at the situation and remorse for the men going through the same fight. The BBC's Nick Bryant reports from New York.
Rosie, how you feeling? What do you think? How do you feel?
There was joy in this moment for the victims of Harvey Weinstein, that the convicted rapist will spend so long behind bars, that their voices have finally been heard. In court, Jessica Mann and Mimi Haley delivered victim statements describing how he'd ruined their lives, and then had to listen to Weinstein's rambling remarks, in which he expressed remorse for the women, but also the men going through this crisis. Then came the sentencing, 23 years. There were gasps in the courtroom as the sentence was read out, not least because it's so severe. Most legal analysts had expected 10 to 15 years. So from this courthouse in Manhattan, a punishment that will echo around the world.
This is what justice looks like. 20 plus 3 years.
The model, Turali Wolf, was one of the women who testified during the trial.
For the first time I can say I feel a sense of happiness, I guess. Because this isn't a happy circumstance to be that we're all here for. But I feel joyous.
This is very severe. What's your response?
Ridiculous is what it is.
Harvey Weinstein's defence team had sought the minimum sentence of 5 years in prison. He faces 23.
I think that number is a cowardly number to give. I think the judge caved, just as I believe the jury caved, and I am not happy.
But it's the feelings of Weinstein's victims that matter. And for the model, Ambra Batalana Gutierrez, that number, 23, is especially poignant.
I was 23 when he assaulted me. That is the number when my life was ruined, so let's say.
And your response to today's sentence?
I'm super happy.
From his limousine to a prison van. From the red carpets of Hollywood to the notorious Rikers Island jail in New York. A Me Too message, especially to men of power, that wealth and menace offer no immunity from prosecution.
The BBC's Nick Bryant with that report. Joe Biden has taken a major step towards clinching the Democratic nomination after several more decisive victories last night, including the biggest prize, Michigan. It's a huge blow to his progressive rival, Bernie Sanders, who has pinned his resurrection on the state, which he snagged off Hillary Clinton in a major upset in 2016. But despite that, Mr Sanders is vowing to stay in the race. The ABC's Catherine Diss reports.
Thank you all very much for being here.
Fronting the cameras for the first time since last night's bruising defeat, Bernie Sanders started with the number one goal of this race.
Donald Trump is the most dangerous president in the modern history of our country, and he must be defeated.
Speaking from his home state of Vermont, he resigned to underdog status.
I cannot tell you how many people our campaign has spoken to who have said, and I quote, "I like what your campaign stands for. I agree with what your campaign stands for, but I'm going to vote for Joe Biden because I think Joe is the best candidate to defeat Donald Trump." Needless to say, I strongly disagree with that assertion.
Despite vowing to stay in the contest, it's difficult to ignore the insurmountable lead Joe Biden is building.
Joe Biden is going to win the state of Michigan, as you can see.
Joe Biden will win the Missouri Democratic primary here. This is a huge win.
Joe Biden will win the primary in Mississippi.
Last night, the states fell thick and fast for the former vice president. He took out 4 of the 6 states up for grabs.
Just over a week ago, many of the pundits declared that this candidacy was dead. Now we're very much alive.
With campaign rallies cancelled due to coronavirus fears, Joe Biden's victory speech took a more serious and subdued tone as he sought to differentiate himself from how the current president is dealing with the crisis.
This whole coronavirus issue is a matter of presidential leadership. And later this week, I'll be speaking to you on what I believe the nation should be doing to address this virus.
Just 10 days since his resounding victory in South Carolina, thanks to an outpouring of support from African American voters, the former vice president has taken out big wins in the South, the Northeast and the Midwest.
The race for the Democratic nomination for all practical purposes is over.
Bill Galston from the Brookings Institute says voters are looking for a steady hand to steer the ship rather than radical change.
He has been in public life for 4 decades. He has served honorably in a number of different positions. He's well known to most Americans.
More big states vote next week. Bernie lost all of those up for grabs in 2016.
The ABC's Catherine Diss with that report. And just a little bit of your feedback before we go on tourism industry representatives calling for the travel ban on China to be lifted immediately. This person says, no way, travel ban on China must remain, and further ban on WOMAD, Pacifica Festival and the Mosque Memorial must also be canned. We are not out of the woods yet. Better safe than epidemic. Airport screening must also be increased. Someone else says, if Italian tourists are on holiday for 2 weeks or less days, it would be doubtful that they would self-isolate in their accommodation for that time. However, on the other hand, someone else says absolutely should lift the travel ban from China. It's an evidence-based decision, they say. Someone else, though, it would be totally irresponsible to prematurely lift travel bans. Now, finally tonight, before we head off, this Sunday marks the first anniversary of the March 15 mosque attacks, and RNZ and New Zealand On Air have commissioned a digital memorial to pay tribute to the lives lost at the Al Noor and Linwood mosques. The Living Flower Wall allows members of the public to explore messages and stories from the original memorial that sprang up in the central city following the attacks. If you go to our Checkpoint Facebook page, you can watch the stories of those affected, and you can post your own message on the virtual flower wall by going to www.livingflowerwall.rnz.co.nz. And thank you so much for being with us this evening. Don't forget, you can check back on all our stories online on our Facebook page and on video. Thank you.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Asia-Pacific markets have been rocked by today's shock announcement that the United States is banning entry by travellers from Europe and advisories that American citizens reconsider travelling abroad. In line with other major markets in the region, the NZX Top 50 Index has fallen by 5%, and Auckland Airport ceased trading an hour before the market closed. A tourism leader says the country could lose billions if the COVID-19 related travel ban on China is not lifted. And the Civil Aviation Authority has grounded 21 helicopters because of safety concerns. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
If you are unsure what the fire restrictions are, there's a website, checkit'salright.nz. It's got all the information you need.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
These NRL players have gone to a school as part of their professional NRL